837 people were scheduled to hang. President Trump claims he stopped it with one phone call. Whether that claim is entirely accurate, partially true, or strategically exaggerated, the number itself tells you everything you need to understand about the stakes of what is unfolding between Washington and Tehran at this very moment. Because while those executions may be paused, something else has not paused. The largest American naval armada assembled in recent memory is currently cutting through international waters, heading directly toward the Persian Gulf. And President Trump has given Iran a deadline to come to the negotiating table. What separates this crisis from every confrontation that came before is a single extraordinary detail. Trump refuses to reveal when that deadline expires. According to the president's own words delivered from the White House podium, only Iran knows when time runs out. Consider the implications of that statement. The commander-in-chief of the most powerful military force in human history has told a nation of more than 80 million people that a clock is ticking toward potential military action. He has confirmed that a deadline exists. He has confirmed that he communicated this deadline directly to Iranian leadership, and then he deliberately left everyone else on Earth in complete darkness about when that countdown reaches zero. Allied governments in Europe were not informed. Partner nations in the Middle East were not told. American citizens watching the news right now have no idea whether we are days away, hours away, or already past the point of no return. This is not standard diplomatic pressure. This is calculated psychological warfare executed at the highest level of international statecraft. On Friday afternoon, President Trump stood before reporters gathered at the White House and delivered a series of statements that have since reverberated through foreign ministries and intelligence agencies around the world. He confirmed that the naval deployment currently underway represents a significant escalation in American force posture. Additional warships are being dispatched to join the flotilla already in motion. The flagship of this armada is the USS Abraham Lincoln, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, capable of projecting overwhelming air superiority across any theater of operations. Accompanying the Lincoln is an entire carrier strike group consisting of guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels, along with the submarines that travel unseen beneath the surface. Trump described this force as larger than what he sent to Venezuela before the operation that resulted in the capture and detention of Nicolas Maduro. That comparison is not accidental. Trump wants the Iranian regime to remember what happened in Caracas. Less than 2 months ago, American Special Operations Forces conducted a nighttime assault that extracted Venezuela's authoritarian leader from his own capital. Maduro was transported aboard an American warship and is now confined to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, awaiting trial on federal drug trafficking charges. When Trump positions naval assets and speaks about force, recent history proves he is willing to use them. The message to Tehran is unambiguous. This is not bluster, this is preparation. When reporters pressed the president about the possibility of negotiated settlement, Trump selected his words with visible precision. He said, "Hopefully we will make a deal." He said, "If we make a deal, that would be good." Then his tone shifted slightly as he added the qualifier that has defined his approach to adversaries since returning to office. He said, "If we do not make a deal, we will see what happens." That phrase, "we will see what happens," has become Trump's signature method of preserving maximum optionality while refusing to commit to any specific course of action. It leaves the door open to everything and closes the door to nothing. Friend and foe alike are meant to understand that all pathways remain available. But the most consequential exchange came when a reporter asked directly about the deadline Trump had reportedly given to Iran. The president confirmed that yes, he provided Iranian leadership with a specific time frame for responding to American demands. He confirmed that this deadline carries weight and that Tehran understands the seriousness of the situation. And then he made the statement that has thrown diplomatic calculations into chaos. He said that only Iran knows what that deadline is. He has left the entire world, including America's closest allies, waiting in uncertainty to discover what the next steps will be. To comprehend why this particular confrontation feels different from previous tensions between Washington and Tehran, you need to understand the trajectory that brought us to this point. Rewind to May of 2018 during Trump's first term in office. On that day, he announced that the United States was withdrawing from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear agreement painstakingly negotiated during the Obama administration. That deal had required Iran to accept strict limits on uranium enrichment and submit to invasive international inspections. In exchange, the United States, European powers, and the United Nations agreed to lift crippling economic sanctions that had devastated the Iranian economy. Trump called the agreement the worst deal ever made by the United States, a giant fiction that only delayed Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons while enriching the regime. After withdrawing, Trump reimposed punishing sanctions and initiated what his administration termed maximum pressure, a strategy designed to strangle Iranian finances until the regime either collapsed or capitulated to American demands. The results were mixed at best. Iran's economy did suffer tremendously, with inflation spiking and ordinary citizens experiencing genuine hardship. But the regime did not fall. Instead, Tehran responded by gradually accelerating its nuclear program, pushing enrichment levels higher than at any point since the original deal was signed. International monitors raised alarms as Iran moved closer to the technical threshold where producing weapons grade material becomes theoretically possible. Then came last June. In a coordinated operation with Israeli forces, the Trump administration launched strikes directly against Iranian nuclear facilities. The president subsequently claimed that these attacks had obliterated Iran's nuclear program, setting back any weapons capability by years, if not decades. American and Israeli officials celebrated what they described as a decisive blow against proliferation. But here is the question that hangs over everything happening right now. If Iran's nuclear program was truly obliterated last June, why does Trump need to send an even larger armada this January? Why issue secret ultimatums? Why the unprecedented secrecy around deadlines? The gap between official claims and current actions suggests the situation on the ground in Iran is considerably more complicated than any public statement has acknowledged. Tehran's response to Friday's developments arrived within hours and carried unmistakable defiance. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi traveled to Istanbul for diplomatic consultations with his Turkish counterpart and used the platform to deliver a message clearly intended for audiences in Washington as much as Ankara. He declared that Iran has no problem with negotiations. The phrasing was careful. Iran remains open to diplomacy. Iran has not closed the door. But Araghchi immediately attached a precondition that cuts directly to the heart of this standoff. He said negotiations cannot take place under the shadow of threats. In simpler terms, Iran refuses to negotiate while American warships are positioned to strike. The regime views such circumstances not as negotiation, but as capitulation under duress. And then Araghchi articulated a position that represents a fundamental red line for Tehran, one that has never been crossed in any previous round of nuclear negotiations under any American administration. He stated clearly and without ambiguity that Iran's missiles will never be the subject of any negotiations. This is significant because one of Trump's core demands goes beyond nuclear issues. The administration wants Iran to surrender not only any nuclear weapons ambitions, but also the ballistic missile program that provides the regime's primary conventional deterrent against regional adversaries. These missiles can reach Israel, they can reach Saudi Arabia, they can reach American military installations scattered throughout the Middle East. Tehran considers them essential to national defense. And according to the foreign minister, they are permanently and completely off the negotiating table, regardless of American pressure. However, the statement that should command closest attention came not from the foreign ministry, but from deep within Iran's political power structure. A senior advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei delivered a warning that left zero room for alternative interpretation. He stated that any military action by the United States from any location and at any level will be considered the start of a war, not a limited exchange, not a contained incident, full-scale war. He promised that Iran's response would be immediate, occurring without delay. He promised it would be comprehensive, meaning strikes against multiple targets simultaneously. He promised it would be unprecedented, surpassing anything the region has witnessed in previous conflicts, and then he named a specific target, Tel Aviv, America's closest ally in the region, Israel's largest metropolitan area, the heart of a nation whose security American administrations have pledged to guarantee for decades. That city was named explicitly as a target for Iranian retaliation. Foreign Minister Araghchi added additional detail that paints a vivid picture of Iran's defensive posture at this critical moment. He stated that the Iranian armed forces are prepared with their fingers on the trigger to immediately and powerfully respond to any aggression against Iranian land, air, or sea. That phrase deserves emphasis. Fingers on the trigger. This is not theoretical readiness. This is not contingency planning, collecting dust in a filing cabinet. This is active alert status across Iranian military and paramilitary forces. Fingers on the trigger. That image should remain present in your mind as you process what is unfolding, because the situation between Washington and Tehran has moved beyond diplomatic sparring and posturing. Two heavily armed powers are now describing operational readiness for armed conflict, while a secret deadline counts down toward an unknown moment of potential detonation. The implications of actual hostilities extend far beyond the capitals of two nations. Iran has spent 4 decades cultivating proxy forces, allied militias, and ideological partners throughout the Middle East. This network represents the crown jewel of Iranian strategic investment, allowing Tehran to project power and threaten adversaries without directly engaging the conventional military forces that American and Israeli capabilities would overwhelm. Any conflict between the United States and Iran would not remain bilateral. It would metastasize across the entire region within hours. Consider Hezbollah in Lebanon. This Iranian-backed militant organization maintains an arsenal that some intelligence assessments estimate at more than 150,000 rockets and missiles. These weapons are positioned in bunkers, basements, and concealed locations throughout southern Lebanon, all pointed at population centers in northern Israel. If war erupts between Washington and Tehran, Hezbollah activates. Israeli cities come under bombardment while Israeli defense systems struggle to intercept the sheer volume of incoming projectiles. Casualties climb on both sides of the border. Consider Iranian-backed militias operating in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere in the Levant. American military bases throughout the region have already endured sporadic rocket and drone attacks from these groups over the past year. A full-scale conflict would transform those sporadic incidents into sustained campaigns. American service members would find themselves under attack across multiple countries simultaneously. Force protection becomes exponentially more difficult. The risks to American lives multiply. Consider the Houthis in Yemen. This Iranian-aligned movement has already demonstrated the capability to strike commercial shipping in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. They have targeted vessels transiting international waters and even launched attacks against Saudi Arabian infrastructure hundreds of miles from their controlled territory. In a regional war scenario, global trade routes become contested zones, oil shipments face interdiction threats, insurance rates for commercial vessels skyrocket. The economic ripple effects extend to gas pumps and grocery stores on every continent. If shooting starts between American forces and Iranian targets, every single one of these flashpoints ignites simultaneously. The conflict ceases to be about nuclear programs or negotiating leverage. It becomes a multi-front regional war with unpredictable escalation dynamics. No serious analyst on any side believes containment would be simple or even necessarily possible. What makes the current moment particularly disorienting is the contrast with what else the Trump administration is pursuing at this exact same time. In the identical 48-hour window, where Trump has threatened Iran with armadas, secret deadlines, and implicit promises of violence if negotiations fail, he has also claimed publicly that peace between Russia and Ukraine is closer than ever before. Speaking to reporters at that same White House briefing on Friday, Trump discussed the situation in Eastern Europe with notably different energy than his Iran commentary. He acknowledged that Ukrainian President Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin hold deep personal animosity toward each other, which complicates any negotiated settlement. But he insisted that substantial progress is being made toward ending the conflict that has raged since February 2022. Trump went further than optimism. He revealed that he had personally telephoned Putin and requested that Russia halt missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities during a period of record-breaking cold temperatures that was causing humanitarian suffering for civilians without reliable heating. According to Trump, Putin agreed to this request as what the president characterized as a gesture of goodwill. The Kremlin has not explicitly confirmed or denied this account, though Russian forces did reportedly reduce certain categories of strikes for several days. Whether this represents genuine de escalation or tactical pause remains debated among military observers. The juxtaposition is striking enough to induce conceptual whiplash: war drums pounding toward Tehran, olive branches extending toward Moscow, maximum pressure and saber rattling for Iran, personal diplomacy and deal seeking for Russia. Both trajectories advancing simultaneously under the same administration during the same news cycle. How should observers interpret this apparent contradiction? Some analysts argue this represents sophisticated strategic flexibility. They contend that Trump recognizes different adversaries require different approaches and that he is tailoring his methods appropriately to distinct challenges. Iran is a regional power pursuing capabilities that could reshape Middle Eastern power dynamics. Russia is a nuclear armed superpower whose conflict with Ukraine threatens European stability and American alliance commitments. Different situations demand different tools, according to this view. Others see something closer to incoherence. They argue that the administration lacks a unified foreign policy doctrine and instead lurches between confrontation and accommodation based on the president's instincts on any given day. The same leader who builds toward potential war in one theater claims imminent peace in another, with both positions subject to reversal as circumstances shift. Critics in this camp worry that adversaries and allies alike struggle to predict American behavior, which creates instability rather than leverage. What no one disputes is that this duality exists right now. As the Armada sails toward Iran, envoys prepare for weekend talks about Ukraine. The same hand signs orders deploying carrier strike groups and scribbles notes for negotiations with Russian intermediaries. Whether this represents genius or chaos, it is the reality governing international affairs at this moment in history. Compounding the complexity of this geopolitical picture is the domestic backdrop against which Trump conducts his Iran confrontation. The United States government has entered partial shutdown. At midnight on Friday night, appropriated funding lapsed for significant portions of the federal apparatus because Congress failed to complete action on spending legislation before the deadline expired. Agencies covering defense, foreign affairs, health services, transportation, and homeland security find themselves technically unfunded. While some operations continue under emergency provisions, others face disruption. The immediate cause of this impasse was not foreign policy disagreement, but domestic conflict over immigration enforcement. Over the past month, federal agents operating in Minneapolis, Minnesota, under an operation the administration calls Metro Surge, have shot and killed 2 American citizens during enforcement activities. The deaths of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Pretty sparked massive protests in the city and across the nation. Democratic lawmakers demanded policy changes, restricting how immigration agents operate as a condition for their votes on spending bills. The White House and Republican leadership refused to accept those conditions. The Senate eventually passed a compromise late Friday night by a vote of 71 to 29. That package funds most government agencies through September, but provides only 2 weeks of continued funding for the Department of Homeland Security, allowing negotiations over immigration enforcement to continue. However, the House of Representatives departed for weekend recess before voting on the Senate deal. They will not return until Monday at the earliest. This means the shutdown continues through the weekend, regardless of the Senate action. This domestic fracturing provides the context for everything Trump is attempting internationally: a government unable to fund its own operations, streets in an American city occupied by protesters clashing with federal agents amid shooting deaths of citizens, a Congress so divided that keeping the lights on requires last-minute brinksmanship, a political landscape where immigration enforcement has become more controversial than foreign military operations. Against that backdrop of internal tension, the president is conducting the highest stakes international standoff of his second term. Some of his critics argue this is deliberate, that foreign crises provide distraction from domestic problems and rally round the flag dynamics that benefit embattled leaders. Supporters counter that Trump inherited multiple crises simultaneously and is managing them with the resources available. Regardless of interpretation, the confluence of domestic division and international confrontation creates a volatile environment where miscalculation becomes more likely. The secret deadline functions as the critical variable controlling escalation or de-escalation. By withholding specifics from everyone except Tehran, Trump has manufactured maximum uncertainty throughout the international system. Every capital must guess. Every intelligence service must estimate. Every military planner must prepare contingencies without knowing the timeline they are working against. If Iranian leadership interprets the deadline as imminent, approaching rapidly with little time remaining, they may accelerate back channel negotiations through intermediaries. They may offer concessions they would not otherwise consider. They may reach out through Turkey, Oman, or other potential mediators seeking any path towards settlement before the clock expires. Alternatively, if Tehran calculates that Trump is fundamentally bluffing, that he lacks either the political will or domestic support to actually launch strikes, they may dig into their positions and simply wait him out. They may conclude that American domestic chaos, falling approval ratings, and congressional opposition make military action unlikely regardless of deadlines. Under this interpretation, the Armada becomes expensive theater without genuine danger. The risk emerges when calculations diverge from reality. If Iran believes the deadline is distant while Trump actually intends to act soon, or if Washington believes Tehran will negotiate while Iran has already decided to resist, the space for miscommunication becomes catastrophically wide. Neither side fully understands the other's red lines, timelines, or decision making processes. That uncertainty is where wars begin, even when no one wanted them. Recognizing this danger, intermediaries are working urgently to create off ramps and communication channels. Turkish President Erdogan telephoned Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian on Friday and offered to serve as facilitator between Tehran and Washington. Turkey occupies a unique position as a NATO ally with maintained relations with Iran, allowing it to communicate with both sides in ways others cannot. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan confirmed ongoing contact with Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and expressed commitment to keeping lines open. The United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have engaged through their own diplomatic networks. Both Gulf monarchies have invested heavily in recent years to reduce regional tensions after experiencing the costs of proxy conflicts. They understand that war between America and Iran would directly threaten their own territory, infrastructure, and economic interests. The UAE hosts American military facilities. Saudi oil installations have previously been targeted by Iranian proxies. Neither country wants to become collateral damage in a superpower confrontation. Yet, even with mediators working overtime, the fundamental dynamics remain dangerous. International crises carry their own momentum. Events accelerate. Information flows imperfectly. Decisions get made under time pressure with incomplete data. History demonstrates repeatedly that wars often erupt, not because leaders decide they want conflict, but because circumstances spiral beyond anyone's control. A ship positioned incorrectly strays into contested waters. A communication sent from one headquarters arrives at another seconds too late. A field commander facing an ambiguous situation interprets orders in ways their superiors never intended. The space between deliberate choice and catastrophic accident narrows dramatically during moments exactly like this one. The coming 72 hours will provide critical signals about trajectory. This weekend, according to multiple reports, Russian envoys, including Putin's special representative Kirill Dmitriev, are traveling to Miami to meet with Trump administration officials regarding Ukraine. If those sessions produce visible progress, it may indicate that Trump currently prioritizes deal-making across the board and that the Iran confrontation represents pressure toward negotiation rather than actual war preparation. Conversely, if Ukraine talks stall or collapse, presidential frustration might redirect toward securing a foreign policy victory elsewhere, increasing the likelihood of forceful action against Tehran. Careful monitoring of Iranian public statements will reveal the temperature of any ongoing back-channel communications. Rhetorical softening from Tehran, language emphasizing openness to dialogue, reduction in explicit threats. These would suggest diplomatic traction is developing out of public view. Escalating defiance, repeated assertions of red lines, prominent displays of military readiness. These would suggest back channels are either non-existent or failing to produce movement. Military positioning offers another observable data stream. Open source analysts track naval deployments in near real time using commercial satellite imagery, ship transponder data, and observation networks. Significant changes in the carrier group's location, speed, or formation would telegraph operational intentions. Movement toward Iranian territorial waters signals preparation for potential action. Movement away signals de-escalation or repositioning. And finally, Truth Social. The president's preferred platform for direct communication frequently serves as an early indicator of his thinking before any official channels engage. Statements posted there have preceded policy announcements, revealed negotiating positions, and signaled shifts in approach throughout his second term. Anyone attempting to understand the Iran situation should monitor that feed continuously. What we are witnessing in this moment is a situation where outcomes remain genuinely undetermined. The arrow has been drawn and the bow is bent, but the release has not occurred. An armada moves toward a nation whose leaders have promised full scale war if American forces attack. A deadline exists, but its expiration remains concealed from all but those who issued and received it. Regional powers prepare contingencies for spillover. They cannot prevent and may not survive unscathed. An American president whose established pattern involves threatening aggressively before pivoting to negotiated agreements at critical decision points faces the question of whether that pattern holds or whether circumstances have finally aligned differently. Somewhere between the Situation Room in Washington and the command centers of Tehran, a clock continues its relentless count towards zero. Only one side possesses knowledge of how much time remains on its face. The rest of the world, 7 billion people on 6 continents, watches, waits, and wonders what happens the moment that count reaches its inevitable conclusion.